Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Wednesday, our final day of the conference. I hope you enjoyed the breakfast this morning. I managed to grab something, which is nice. I don't always get breakfast. Um, uh, Today is the final day of the conference, and today we begin with a plenary session and an opportunity afterwards to meet the speakers. Then we move on to, again, concurrent breakout sessions in the rooms adjacent, Regency rooms 1 through 3 and Regency rooms 4 through 6. Lunch will be served at 1 p.m. in the Regency foyer and terrace. And after that, we adjourn. So we will probably have kind of a closing ceremony before lunch and then wish everybody well. The Cenic 2028 conference will be back here in Monterey, which makes me happy. You can keep up with Cenic news and key conference dates by signing up for the newsletter on the website. And there's always really great things coming out of the news from Cenic. And Cenic is also active on social media. So follow us on LinkedIn. And if you do post to social media yourself and you've got some pictures you'd like to share, you can either email them to Leanne or post yourself with the hashtag Cenic 2026. And with that, I'll turn it over to our panel and let the day begin.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. Okay, is this the wonky, geeky group? Okay, so are you guys ready? We are going to do a massive deep dive into federal policy. It's been pretty crappy this year, just saying. Okay, just to cut to the chase. Okay, and I brought to you an amazing panel. We have here people who are working every day for anchor institutions at the federal level to lobby the White House, to lobby Congress, to lobby the FCC, and to lobby USAC. And this is the A team that I brought to you. The first one I want to introduce is one of our superstars, which is Kristen Corra. Raise your hand, Kristen. She is the policy counsel at Shelby. And for those of you that go on the Shelby calls, you know she is a superstar. She is tracking broadband initiatives at the FCC and all over. She presides over the policy calls. She drafts comments. There is nothing this woman cannot do. Next, at the very end, we have Phil Neufeld, who is the Shelby chair. And Phil is an amazing guy. He's from Fresno State Unified. I'm sure you all know him. His title is the Executive Officer of Strategic Research, which is better than that long title you used to have. And the main thing is, I can tell you Phil is passionate. And he goes to Washington and he tells the Fresno story, which is very impactful, particularly during the pandemic era. And right next to Phil, we have Beverly Sutherland. Many people know Beverly. She's the president and CEO of EdTech Funds. Her specialty is broadband deployment and E-rate program compliance. She is a whiz. She is also on the board of Shelby, and I always value her opinion because she knows the program inside and out, all the rules, and she's very engaged. So I just love Beverly. And last but not least is a guy I recruited to the Shelby board, which is Luis Alejandro Wong from, of course, California K-12 high-speed network. He's one of my heroes because he keeps the kids connected, and that's the most important thing. He oversees and coordinates the participation of K-12 schools and public libraries in the California Research and Education Network. So we have your superstars here, and with no further ado, we're going to get right into it. So first thing, acronym alert, just saying that one more time. These people do not know the acronyms. Okay, so let's start with Shelby. Are we able to advance these slides with the green arrow?
That's the Schools, Health, Library, and Broadband Coalition.
Thank you. See, no acronyms. He caught me on that. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So there's a lot of stuff, just so you know. This is the hottest stuff right there. Okay, Kristen, who is Shelby?
Yay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yes. So, who is Shelby? So, Shelby stands for the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. We are a national nonprofit public interest organization. We are a membership organization. So, we have, as you can see, there are over 300 different members, and they come from various sectors of the broadband landscape. So I think that's what makes Shelby very unique, right? You might think of a trade organization or a trade association where they have one specific type of member, but Shelby has all different types of members. So we get schools, libraries, healthcare providers, but we also get providers, we get RENs, research and education networks, consultants, you name it, other nonprofits. And I love that about Shelby because we really get a lot of people to the table. So when we're talking about federal policy, whether it's at the FCC or Congress, I get to talk to a lot of different folks who deal with programs like E-rate and rural healthcare. So we do advocacy mostly around the Universal Service Fund, mostly E-rate and rural healthcare programs.
And for 2 years, Shelby has had a congressional fly-in. So what does that mean? It means we brought representatives of anchor institutions to Washington, where Shelby arranged meetings with their state's congressional members, a fly-in. And so tell me about the fly-in, Kristen. How did it go?
Yes. So it seems like just yesterday that we were at the fly-in.
Raise your hand if you were at the fly-in this year. And last year, who was at the fly-in?
I was there.
All right.
So this year we organized over 80 different meetings. We did meetings with House representatives and senators' offices as well. So we had folks fly in from everywhere, including California. So we visited with 7 different congressional offices in California, both House and the Senate, and folks from everywhere else. So think of all the different states. We had folks pretty much coming in from almost everywhere. I think we had 46 total Shelby members that flew in, so that's a pretty good amount for an organization like Shelby. So it was just
With limited funding for travel.
That is very true, yes. So really impactful work. And basically the premise was that we wanted these folks to fly in and tell their stories about E-rate and rural healthcare. Some of these staffers, they might not even know what E-rate is. They might not know how it works, right? They have maybe a high level understanding. So getting folks to fly in to actually talk about those programs is critical.
Okay, so now I want those of you that went either this year or last year to tell me, what story did you tell Congress this year? I'm going to start with Phil.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to be able to tell the staffers and our representatives the on-the-ground reality, bringing effective personal stories as well as robust, really grounded data. So the story that I often tell is around the number of folks in urban low-income neighborhoods who, for them, internet isn't affordable or available or of high quality for them to be able to do what's necessary in the modern world, and then tie that to those universal values around employability, economic mobility, economic development, better healthcare, better wellness, and this affects people in those districts for the representatives. And when they make that connection, they're like, this is making a difference. Yes, it is.
So did you actually bring each member some stats about how much E-rate money flows into their district or the state?
I want to say, first of all, the Shelby staff pulled off one of the best fly-ins ever. I happen to annually go for the credit unions that I serve on. And they've been doing that for a long time. 5,000 members show up there. But the quality of what Shelby's doing, so if you want to come along for a fly-in, Shelby makes it so straightforward to do. We actually had data. I mean, this is a credit to our E-rate consultants in our organization. We had data that was specific to every district. So, here's the amount of money that flows into your district. Here's what it means to people on the ground, every single person. And here's the multiplier effect of, for example, the fibers that are getting subsidized when carriers, like some of the folks out in the audience here, bring additional pairs for new things like maybe a call center in a neighborhood that could never have that before.
Thank you. Luis?
So for the last 12 years, we've been entrenched in really the hardship cases in California, the schools that have poor connectivity, and lately the libraries as well. And so, we have over 500 stories to tell. And I do want to do a shout out to a lot of the folks in this room, our partners that have made all that possible. But I did take, 10 of the most compelling stories in California, the sites that really struggled to get infrastructure and are finally have something in terms of semblance of high speed. And the message was really simple. We are not done yet. There are still schools and libraries in California that don't have access to high-speed broadband. And so we're still not done yet. There's still a lot of work to do. E-rate is technically been around for 28 years. And we're really trying to plant the seed of what the next 30 years would look like. And this is why these fly-ins are so important. And I want to echo what Phil said. The fly-ins were super well organized, very strategic, with information, with data points, with stories. I left them with a packet of stories because that's what we need to tell, that we're still not done yet. And I think the other point, a theme that we'll see across this presentation is around cybersecurity. I think that's another point that we've been making to the folks at Washington. We need to protect our kids. We need to protect our most valuable, things that we have in life, which is our kiddos. So.
Beverly, is there something you wanted to add about the fly-in? You went last year, right?
Sure, yeah. No, last year was amazing. That was my first fly-in, and got to know how our government works even more as it relates to the Universal Services Program. One of the things we were advocating for last year was hotspot lending and Wi-Fi on the school bus, and really just bringing those stories from clients, many of whom are in this room, that had like amazing hotspot lending programs that had just tremendous impact on bringing that equitable access to their communities, and using those stories like from San Diego County Library System. They did like tremendous work in bridging that divide and bringing those resources to their patrons. And then also making the point of Wi-Fi on the school bus, how important that is for districts that have a lot of ruralness, especially where the students are on the bus for over an hour sometimes. And the schools, the entities have been tremendous at organizing ways to get them engaged to do their homework and take advantage of this time, and now the rug has been completely pulled out from under them. So we're certainly always advocating for those programs to come back, because we know that in 2026 and beyond, you have to have access.
Thank you, Bev. So let's go right to hotspots and Wi-Fi, since Beverly brought it up. Kristen, what happened?
Oh my goodness.
What happened?
Yes. So unfortunately, the school bus Wi-Fi and hotspot lending program, they were rolled back last year. Which is unfortunate. There was a lot of work. Then Chairwoman
Years
Rosenworcel.
of work.
Yes, years of work.
Years of work.
So Chairwoman Rosenworcel at the time, she created this, what we call the Learn Without Limits initiative. And there were sort of 3 goalposts associated with that initiative. So it was hotspot lending, school bus Wi-Fi, and cybersecurity. That was kind of tacked on there. So fast, we did a lot of work. There were a lot of comments. There were so many comments into the record just about hotspots and how that program could be set up with safeguards, right? Guardrails, and how you implement it into the current E-rate system. So a lot of support for that. So anyway, fast forward to last year, the FCC did end up rolling back. Now, I will say that prior to the FCC rolling back the hotspot program, we saw efforts in Congress to actually do that work, which was actually pretty detrimental if that would have gone forward. The Senate passed a resolution to roll back hotspots, and then it went to the House. And Shelby, we did a lot of advocacy and education. We met with a lot of House offices. We brought libraries to those calls, and we talked about, here's how libraries and schools have already applied for this funding, right? They want it. This is the impact to them. So we really did a lot of education around, what could happen if they rolled that back on the Congress side. Now, fortunately, they didn't, the House did not pass that resolution. And we were thankful for that, because if they would have passed that resolution, the FCC could not bring a program similar to the Hotspots program that we had forward in any future setting. So because the FCC was the one who ultimately rolled it back, we could potentially see it come back in a future FCC.
Under a different administration. Any other comments from the panelists on that one topic?
So we put,
Quick comments, please.
yeah, we put bus Wi-Fi on our 100 buses at Fresno Unified about 10 years ago. Stories of behavior improvements, time for athletes and people doing field trips to actually learn along the way and make best use of their time. Because a lot of these students don't get internet access when they go home, so this was a big deal. And we used the funding. I hope we're able to continue to do that. I hope the service continues, because it's going to be harder as the budget cuts come to the districts to say this is still a high priority, but it meant a big deal to our students.
Okay, so it's important to have a relationship with your member in DC to explain to them how the anchor uses these Wi-Fi hotspots and school bus Wi-Fi, the positive impact it has, data, we need data, and bring it to them. Okay, we're gonna go to another hot topic. We spent a lot of time on Universal Service Fund defense. Unfortunately, we've had a sustained attack on the Universal Service Fund by Consumer Research, and they have been successful in two federal courts, in saying it's a, quote, unconstitutional tax. And then another argument was that USAC, which is the group that administrates the E-rate, was not being adequately supervised by the FCC, and so the industry controlled it, and so therefore it was, terrible, all that kind of thing. So Shelby and many members launched a really sustained effort to defend the USF in the courts, and we went all the way up to the Supremes. I was honored to file a brief with other former FCC commissioners defending how the FCC indeed manages USAC, and it was cited in the last decision, so I was kind of excited about that. But Kristen, that was a huge victory. Tell me about it.
Yes. So as Rachelle said, so this case, was in the courts for years as well. We were at the 5th Circuit, the 6th Circuit, 11th, and the DC Circuit. So consumers did not stop. They kept bringing this challenge. So originally at the 5th Circuit, as Rachelle indicated, this is kind of a two-pronged sort of argument. We're looking at the authority that was given from Congress to the FCC, right? That's one argument. So did Congress give enough of a principle, like guideposts, to the FCC to be able to set up the program as they have been doing it? Then there was a second argument about the FCC's delegation of authority to USAC, right? Now this is giving USAC the authority to actually administer the program. So consumers was bringing this argument that the way in which both of these, prongs were set up is unconstitutional. So ultimately it went to the Supreme Court and they lost, which was a really great victory. So now though, we have renewed efforts. So even though that's great, I don't want to, sort of alarm anybody, but there is actually current litigation. Consumers is back at the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. It's really interesting. So the parties have briefed the case so far. Shelby just submitted our intervener's brief, and consumers is bringing a very similar argument. They're talking about constitutionality, right, and whether the FCC has authority, but they're focusing on two specific subsections of the statute, and both of those subsections deal specifically with E-rate and rural health care. So they're zoning in on specific pieces of language around E-rate, around rural health care programs, and they're basically saying that, okay, the Supreme Court said last year that, okay, there are specific principles within the statutory language, but we think that these provisions fall outside of those guiding principles. So the FCC doesn't have the authority to administer the programs, as the Supreme Court had laid out last year. So we have filed our brief, the government has filed its brief, and basically we're saying that argument does not hold up. The same principles that the Supreme Court, pointed us to last year, those also apply to those subsections. So this is ongoing. The briefs have been submitted. Consumers will now have its opportunity to file a reply brief, and then we'll go to oral arguments and then a decision. Hopefully all of that will happen this year so we can have some sort of resolution. But anyway, current ongoing litigation, but now we're focused on those subsections.
One interesting point is the 8th and 11th circuits were in support of this. So you can have folks who support something, but all it takes is one circuit coming up to the Supreme Court that can jeopardize it. But I just want to say, being on the Shelby calls and seeing what our communication attorneys are doing across the country in this moment to uphold USF has been super laudable.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so the thread is not over is the summary version of what Kristen just said. But I want you to know that we have a keen focus on it at Shelby. We have pro bono assistance from communications lawyers, and we are on it. Okay, let's switch to Congress. Always fun. What's going on in Congress these days, Kristen?
Okay,
Stay
so-
high level, please.
Here we go,
There's a lot.
yes. So the courts are not the only ones who are looking at the Universal Service Fund. So Congress is also looking at Universal Service Fund reform. So this effort actually began in 2023, but was put a little bit on hold, a hiatus, given that pending Supreme Court decision. So now there is a bicameral, bipartisan group within Congress, and they're looking at USF reform. So they're not only looking at the 4 different programs that are funded under USF, but they're also looking at how the Universal Service Fund is funded or supported, right? So they're looking at what we call contribution reform. So the money that's actually paid into the fund to support the 4 programs. So without getting into the weeds of that, that is gonna be, I think, one of their biggest challenges to sort of understand what services should pay into the fund in order to keep the program sustainable, predictable, for the next 30 years, right? So contribution reform is one thing, and then other, discussions are around the programs themselves. What do the programs support? And as Louise said, in a lot of our recommendations from Shelby, we say, look, the E-rate program, it's working. We don't want you to really come in here and sort of start slashing things and cutting things. We're looking more towards modernization, right? We're looking at things like cybersecurity. How should E-rate fund a permanent sort of cybersecurity solution? So we're focused more on sort of the modernization aspect.
So when you guys were up on the Hill, Phil, Luis, what did you hear in terms of concerns by the staffers or the congressional members about USF?
Well, I would say one of the things is just some basic understandings. For example, that the program in terms of how it's structured, where the federal government has a grant program, the schools have their money to put in, and then the private players also are investing, that there's everyone, it's a fair way with everyone having skin in the game. That was one of the key things. It's a really good structure for a program. The other thing, and so there's a bit of understanding about that, but the other is just reminding people about why this matters from an economic development standpoint, and then also saying, how do we enlarge our view of what's possible based on what we learned from the Affordable Connectivity Program, Emergency Connectivity Fund for laptops for students, and finally what we've learned around mapping and the areas that are just remain impacted and unable to connect in the modern economy. So those are some of the conversations.
Yeah. Expansion of some of the stories around cybersecurity. Los Angeles was part of these meetings, and just great stories about the challenges of these schools and protecting them. There was also trying to find some intersections and connections with other programs like the Lifeline program and expanding broadband. So really trying to understand those intersections of not only connecting schools through E-rate, but connecting homes and making it affordable for people that live in communities that have poor connectivity. And again, just the message about, we're not, there are still, universal service is about universal access, and it is about, we're not done yet. We still need to continue to focus on these places that are hard to connect, and we need to do something about it, so.
Okay, somebody mentioned cyber. I think it was Phil. Let's talk about cyber for a minute. Back in 2024, the FCC proposed a 3-year, $200 million pilot program for enhanced cybersecurity protection of school and library networks. And I think a lot of us know about the LA Unified attack, right? And what was interesting is the FCC funded it outside the E-rate money, which was interesting. There were 2,700 applications received requesting $3.7 billion, $2.7 billion, and all we had available was $200 million. That goes to show what the need is, just saying. Okay, so in January 2025, the FCC gave grants to 707 applicants who were selected, 625 schools and school districts, and 50 libraries. And the pilot is ongoing. We do not know whether the FCC will renew the cyber pilot. They want to study the data from the pilot first. And I saw some stats that about 18.8 million has gone out the door so far to about 140 applicants. So, Beverly, what is the current status of the cyber pilot program? What's your impressions? How's it going?
Well, even though it was only $200 million and only around 700 applicants got a chance to participate, it's been impactful for those organizations. A lot of those organizations would not have the monitoring and detection software that was, the highest requested service for cybersecurity. Only about 14% of the 200 million has gone out the door. And so we're on we just finished the second wave, and it looks like the requests are getting a little larger. However, we still have a long way to go. And, the biggest concern is, when will we have the data for them to be able to determine the permanency of this program?
Oh, so you're worried about a gap in funding between the pilot, the FCC studying the data, and then putting in a new program.
That's correct. That's correct. 3 years, do we wait 3 years to analyze the data, or is there some lessons that can be gathered from even just, having the oversubscription to the program? Is there we submitted a lot of data, right? And there's going to be data, as we go each year. So, hopefully we can, really hone in on that early data to minimize or not even have a gap.
So last night, while we were panel prepping over a lovely seafood dinner in Pacific Grove, this group came up with the idea that we need to have a working group that is working on cybersecurity data so that there isn't a gap. Luis, why is it important to have cyber for schools and libraries?
Well, yeah, we got to protect our kiddos. But, I think that there is a concern about, we heard it last year about, cybersecurity services and everything that you need is so expensive. And so there are some real concerns about making cybersecurity eligible within the Universal Service Fund within E-rate without being thoughtful, because that will just, encroach into the other categories of funding, which is funding for switches, for routers, for wireless access points, for cabling, all the foundational infrastructure. So this is why this working group is so important, because we need those ideas, we need those concepts of how do we implement cybersecurity in these types of funding mechanisms in a way that they don't affect the other pieces bad.
Okay, I do want to get in the weeds in one place. What did the pilot not fund in the, that should be funded? Anyone have any ideas on that? Bev, Phil, Luis?
Well, there's a lot of layers to cybersecurity, and I think the eligible list in the initial pilot was a little bit narrow. And also from a pilot standpoint, it's going to miss some things. We got a lot of really smart cybersecurity folks and networking folks in this room. So I'm just going to give you an example of why this matters, the big story, if you will. So at Fresno Unified, we've got 80,000 laptops, 2 100 gig WAN connections, and 20 to 100 gig across our internet connections, and 20 to 100 times that speed at our schools. Beautiful opportunity for someone to attack us and use the trusted source of a school to attack credit unions, banks, hospitals. 13,000 districts across the U.S., and the capacity and funding or human knowledge to do the work that's necessary isn't often there. So things like managed services we need to think about, whether it's a state-run SOC, sorry, I use an acronym, a Security Operations Center. Anyway, these are the sorts of things that from a bipartisan standpoint we're being pushed for. And we were hearing from the conversations, we move faster for security because it matters to our entire country.
Okay, Phil, you happen to mention we have some really great network people in here. So this is audience participation. Who thinks that something was left off the cyber list for the pilot? Any ideas? Any suggestions from the team here? All right. Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, so some kind of structure, some kind of support for. So, Jeff Wakely, UC Santa Cruz. One of the things that I lead on my campus is research cybersecurity. In fact, I'm doing one right now as I'm listening. And that's a really challenging space in the context of research. It's even more challenging for what you all are attempting to do. And one of the things that we have found very helpful is an interinstitutional dialogue, a formal framework for people sharing operational ways to operationalize policy. So if you haven't included that in your proposal, some structure for that, and it doesn't take a lot of money. We just do semi-weekly planning calls and monthly community-facing calls. It's really important to bring up the smaller institutions so that they can learn from the thought leaders in this area.
That's great. Okay, we're going to take one more.
Good morning, all. Terry Loftus, San Diego County Office of Education. I had the privilege of working with the Wireline Competition Bureau and designing the grant program, and I think there was some thought around not having it too broad because of the expense of these different items, and open and honest. In K-12, we have a lot of dedicated, caring leaders that may not have a full handle on what services that they need, what tools they need, what hardware, what software, et cetera, and so that you could very quickly burn through those dollars if it wasn't done purposefully. So thinking about starting with some guardrails. I agree 3 years to wait for the data is too long. But the other thing I would just point out very briefly, you aptly put the 3.7 billion and about 2,700 applicants. Well, again, you take those 13,000 school districts, about 8,000 charter schools, we're roughly talking about 10% even applied. So the real need is not 3.7 billion. It's probably more like 30 billion when it comes to the total. So just keeping that in context, I think, is helpful, because that I was glad to see that over 2,700 applied, but that was only a fraction.
Okay, so we need a method to help some apply because they don't have the resources to do it. Excellent. All right, audience participation achieved. I love that. Okay, we have to keep moving on. It is the E-rate deadline today, is it? The last day to file your Form 471, just mentioning. I'm sure you guys know that. Now, Bev, you've been in the trenches, Luis, for how many years? What's different about this year, E-rate? Just keep it high level, because this is mostly university folks.
Well, we had this year, I'll just jump right on in. This year was unique. We had three major differences with this year's filing. One is that the government was shut down from October to November, and that caused the eligible services list to be delayed in being released. We didn't get it until December. And on top of that, within the eligible services, they changed how basic maintenance is eligible, the eligibility of basic maintenance. And that has just caused a plethora of issues. In fact, the applicants that filed prior to the ESL had a bug in the EPC system that prevented them from filing their 471s once the window opened. And then the third thing I'd like to point to as a big difference this year is we have a new Category 2 funding budget, and, just really working with applicants to establish what their budget is. As many of you know, there's declining enrollment in school districts in California. And the first year is when you establish that budget. And so just really being mindful of, when to establish your budget for that 5 years, especially in the situation that we're dealing with the population changes.
And it matters, right? Because that formula is based on student, the student counts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we also have a new backend administrator that's helping USAC. So we're expecting probably some delays, more delays, as we move forward. I know that even here in some of our applications for the statewide aren't getting funded yet. So a lot of challenges that we're going to experience with these folks.
Phil, you got anything for us?
I think, just a big thanks to the E-rate consultants. I ran E-rate at Fresno Unified when we first had no budget to begin with, but to be given the guidance about how you get these things done, because you need to start at least a year ahead. What's your architecture? What's changing the technology? What's our vision to move forward? What does it look like in terms of our footprint of things? How old are they? What do we need to replace this year? Then you need to go out for a bid. You need to get it board approved, all ahead of when the windows are necessary to get them brought and applied for. And a lot of times in school districts, and it's probably true in libraries as well, like I see some of the folks here from libraries, is not everyone understands this train and the schedule it has to run on. And if it's late and the board goes, well, gosh, let's take it to the next agenda, you could be out for a year. And the other challenge in K-12 is, as opposed to, I was at Fresno State for a while, we don't have carryover. So if we happen to now have our district budget that feeds, if you will, the grant program, and we lose that year, we're likely to lose that budget. But the big piece about is the dollar amount and the number of students. Your point's really well taken. We've gone from 70,000 to 64,000 students at the wrong time. Our next 5 years are going to be really tight. Even before that, we had more need than E-rate funded. We've gone from 2,000 to 5,000 access points, for example. So it's going to be super hard because the buildings still exist, the network environment still exists, and the cybersecurity needs haven't changed.
Okay. I wanted to talk about screen time. Why is Congress suddenly concerned about screen time, Kristen? And what do we mean by screen time?
Screen time. So this is a little bit of history as well. So let me take you back over a year ago. We saw a little bit of a push around legislation regarding screen time. Now, at that time, there was a piece of legislation called the Eyes on the Board Act, and this largely revolved around students' use of social media. When I was looking back at the legislation, it was really focused more on social media use. And at the time, it went down this road of potentially implicating E-rate. Depending on the school's, social media policies and things like that, it could potentially implicate their E-rate funding. So that was presented, but it didn't really move forward. The language was lessened a little bit to where it wasn't implicating E-rate as harshly, and just really focused more on a school having policies in place. So, but since then, we've seen a little bit of a renewed interest in screen time. So there's been a couple of hearings, one in the Senate, one in the House. There's been some questions in regards to the BEAD program and how some folks are talking about screen time there during listening sessions. And I've seen this evolve more from just focusing on social media to literally the amount of time that students are spending on screens. So we've really divulged into this conversation around sort of mental, well-being, the amount of time they're spending on screens, educational outcomes. So I haven't seen anything pushed recently that implicates E-rate funding. And of course, Shelby, we kind of step in if that is the case because we are very focused on E-rate and, how that could kind of go down this pathway of who's reviewing these policies that schools have? Could that impact their funding in some way? But so I haven't seen that yet, but there is this renewed interest around screen time. And I don't know, if some others want to comment on that. Phil, I know this is something you've been looking at as well, but yeah, so we're really going from just social media, use to kind of this bigger, a little bit more of an amorphous idea around screen time.
Two people to follow in this space is Jonathan Haidt and Ted Cruz, and the movement that comes out of this. And this is really important for higher ed and for K-12 and for libraries. High doses of low-quality screen time isn't healthy and problematic. Yeah, we need to make sure that social media and probably now a bit of AI is properly regulated relative to younger age kids. But we know, I've had the privilege of co-leading a pedagogical teaching and learning shift at Fresno Unified. Over 900 teachers have gone through the program, and it made a tremendous difference with the right conditions in place, not just the technology, but teachers having the right instructional moves, that we've had significant gains with the educational technology. And we've done some different studies. If you look up Fresno Unified, you'll see those studies of high rigor, showing that students, this amplifies their learning, accelerates it, personalizes it, and actually traditionally marginalized groups have participated in the gains. So I think this is one we don't want to lose the message about how high quality, with the right conditions, screen time on safe and secure devices can really make a difference in students' lives. And
Thank you,
yes,
Phil.
outside of that, yeah, it's a problem.
Okay.
Yep.
I wanted to move on to BEAD. I see BEAD down on my topics. We haven't talked about that. Okay, so what is the BEAD program? That was a federal infrastructure program that was voted in during the pandemic era. And the most important thing is there was a $1.86 billion share that California would get for broadband infrastructure. Now, we have our own little state broadband program, but it's nothing that size. It's, roughly like 60, 70 million a year over at the PUC. So this is really important. What happened is during the change of administration, there was a fiber-focused approach here in California, I would say, and the new NTIA under the Trump administration has decided that no, it can't be a fiber only or a fiber-focused effort. It has to include little LEOs, so that's satellite broadband service, and it also should include fixed wireless. And we all know there is a role for fixed wireless in some places, absolutely. So they stopped the train, and now all the states had to do another round of bids to include these other technologies. California got ours in at the last possible moment, end of December, and we are one of 3 remaining states that still has not gotten our NTIA grant. And I do think that has something to do with the back and forth between a certain president and a certain governor of California. So they're gonna torture us as long as possible. But there is $1.86 billion at stake for infrastructure here in the state, and it's very important to reach these last unserved and underserved areas. Now, I wanted to ask Kristen, there is something they call leftover funds from BEAD, and I wanted to ask you what that means, and is there a possibility of more money other than the fund that I just talked about in the possibility for the future?
That's the $21 billion question.
21 billion with a B, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Yes. So these leftover funds, that just refers to any funds that are remaining after the states connect the unserved and underserved locations. So in the statutory language, there are 6 enumerated ways that states can use these leftover funds. And so part of those 6 enumerated ways includes things like broadband adoption, mapping, different things. So right now there is question about how states could actually use those funds. So we are pending guidance from the NTIA, and they're supposed to be, submitting this to tell us how states could actually use that. So they've had a couple of listening sessions, and so basically they wanted to gather stakeholder feedback about how do we use these funds, what guidance should they set forth. So we heard from a lot of different people. There were suggestions about using the funds for, permitting, reform, emergency services, of course, broadband adoption initiatives, digital inclusion, things like that. So right now, I can't tell you what the ultimate answer is because we're still pending that guidance. So we should be able to see something soon. We were hoping for something in early March, but they delayed putting that guidance out. So of course, at Shelby, our position is that, we want states to have the flexibility to determine what they should be able to use those funds for.
Okay, so you brought up the digital inclusion point, and I feel like this is a good time. There was a portion of the IIJA that was called the Digital Equity Act. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. And when the Trump administration came in, they axed it. That word equity apparently is a bad word. And we were due here in California for a big tranche of money. I can't think of what the number was off the top of my head. Do you know, Phil?
It's not coming right
Yeah, anyway, it was a lot. And the whole thing just got axed. California had already written a plan. CDT had gotten together a nice plan. They had done listening sessions all over the state, and it's just frozen.
I even think we knew awardees or sub-awardees. We had gotten pretty far in the process.
Oh, really
Yeah,
far in the
yeah,
process.
right.
There were grantees.
Grantee, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is not good. And that's why if there was to be, quote, leftover funds, California could easily divert some of those funds to the digital inclusion side because we already have grantees with specific programs, spread all over the state in a fair way, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was not a good thing. I said it wasn't a great year last year. That's one of the big ones. Okay. Shall we quickly do Spectrum?
1.4 billion.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you want?
1.4 billion.
1.4 billion. That's what California would have gotten for digital inclusion. Now, I'll just put a footnote in here. Some of you know Sonny McPeak, who's one of my clients at California Emerging Technology Fund. We did intervene in the merger of Frontier and Verizon at the PUC last year, and Sonny achieved a voluntary commitment from Verizon for $41 million, of which most of it will go towards digital inclusion programs, awards to CBOs to do digital inclusion. She's currently doing a bunch of listening sessions all over the state to let people know there's going to be this money and to get input on how to do it. So CETF will have digital inclusion grants. Sonny is now involved in the merger of Cox and Charter, and we're trying to get something similar, a voluntary donation towards digital inclusion as a condition of the merger. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. Okay, let's do pole attachments. Okay, there are some ISPs out in the lobby who are very nice people, and you should go to their booths and tell them how great it is that they came and sponsored this. But why is pole attachments important, and why is Shelby working on that, Kristen?
Yes, okay, so pole attachments are important. You might not think that an organization like Shelby, we deal with anchor institutions and the federal funding programs, you might not think that we deal with pole attachment issues, but we do. So, as part of our mission to ensure that anchors have access to robust, high-speed broadband, we have to ensure that there are no barriers to that access and to deployment. And so that's where pole attachments come into play. So utilizing or leveraging existing infrastructure like poles, utility poles is what we're talking about here, that could be really critical for setting up, new networks and gaining access, especially in rural areas. So this is something we do, we have conversations every month just around broadband deployment generally. So we look at the BEAD program, but then we also talk about things like pole attachments as well.
Yeah, I represent a lot of small ISPs, and I can tell you getting access to a utility or a telephone pole is a very complicated process. The PUC and the FCC have rules, but they're not, they give the pole owner a lot of latitude, let's put it that way. And they seem overwhelmed by the broadband builds that are going on in the last 5 years, and so everything is really slow, not to mention permitting, same shtick there, right? Okay, what haven't we covered, guys?
If we could, on broadband maps. real briefly?
Yes, broadband maps. Go for it, Phil.
So what we found during the pandemic was we had the neighborhood network problem in a lot of areas that we didn't think we would have it. And we did exploration and found that the FCC maps have overstated claims by carriers. So we said, how do we get better data? It was California, it was 2026. Well, it was 2021, whatever at that point. And so we built a speed test we put on all of our 80,000 laptops. We had over 20 million speed tests results, geolocated. And that's the sort of thing that Kristen and I, when we met with the FCC and also with Congress, we showed them the maps. Here's the reality. Here's the big challenge. The same story is true in Oakland, LA, Baltimore, Chicago. And so that's one of the things we need to figure out is how do we improve the maps over time? And the universities have a huge opportunity on this one to help take leadership and do this at a state level. Some of the states, with the BEAD dollars and otherwise, did a tremendous bit of work around using new ways of figuring out where the gaps are, and then figuring out how better to check that what they're putting in place is actually working to address the gaps.
Anyone else on mapping? So important. Okay, let's do spectrum issues.
We should air toss it over to Luis, because what he's done is a model of collaboration and local pragmatic persistence to make sure people get connected.
Okay, Luis, you've been voluntold to say something.
Yes, yeah, I know. Well, there are a lot of examples of innovative uses of spectrum in California, whether it's the educational broadband spectrum, which is the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. We have anywhere between self-managed networks, county offices, districts that have stood up their own LTE infrastructure, very sophisticated, by the way, like in Fresno, in some other places. And then, of course, the Citizens Band Radio Service, or CBRS, is another spectrum that is available out there for institutions, for cities, municipalities to leverage that spectrum to get that to that last mile, to get to their constituents. And this is why spectrum is so important. This conversation about how do we preserve that, how do we not, there's a lot of ideas about technical issues around raising power levels in the CBRS spectrum, which would be detrimental to a lot of our members. And so, we want to protect these things because they complement and they help us with how do we get our mission completed, right, about connecting users.
Luis is also being humble. I think this is also really important for Cenic. He's worked as the school district, connecting with the county and others, the water district, so that everyone plays a part to create connectivity based on the easements and the different assets they have. That's the sort of thing we need to think about. Municipalities, counties, cities, school district, county office of ed, universities, all saying, hey, it's our share, and healthcare, it's our shared population. How do we solve for it together? Not just once, but in perpetuity.
Yeah, and use your utility right-of-ways to do that. Because, utilities, they get access to the right-of-way super fast. Now, CBRS, I just want to say, Kristen, was it AT&T? It was one of the big three mobiles. They did want to up the power level, which was a problem. And I know there's been a big outcry about a major change to the CBRS rules relating to that. And the anchors do care about that, I understand.
Right. So as Luis was saying, so there's actually a current open proceeding at the FCC
Yes.
where they were asking questions about, some of these technical issues within the band, including, whether or not to raise the power levels. So that there were comments in the record, and there's still people who are filing into the record. One of the arguments there is whether or not that would create what you call a tragedy of the commons. So if one user ups their power, then other users would, really quickly follow suit to try to up their power. Then you've got, this dynamic of everybody sort of racing, and is that going to cause interference? So that's just an open proceeding. It hasn't been decided, but that's one thing that's out there right now.
Okay, we have done it. I am so proud of my panel. Okay, we have 8 minutes left for questions from the audience. Anyone have a question? We have an amazing panel here. This is your chance. Someone is pointing. Oh, okay. I'm gonna jog off my eggs.
Thank you. Good morning, Christopher Chin with the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub. In another life, I've done a fair bit of lobbying for ocean conservation at different state capitals and on the Hill as well. And one of your slides indicated that this year you met with 90 members of Congress. And even with celebrities, I have a hard time imagining that you actually got more than 24 actual members. Was that with the offices, or did you get folks coming out just for like a photo op or something like that?
So these were with the offices themselves. So you're correct. It wasn't with the actual member, but with their staff. Yeah, yeah.
However, I saw a photo of you and Ed Markey.
I was going to say, you didn't show that photo, Rachelle.
Oh, what happened to that? You've got the clicker up there. Go show that picture.
Yeah, so we actually had a little bit of a surprise for members. So here are the meetings. So yes, you are correct. So with the staffers of the office, but some of these folks are really, some of them need a little bit of prep in terms of what is E-rate, but then some of them are very connected and they know these issues as well. And so, but at the end of the day, we had a little bit of a surprise. So we told everybody we're going out to the Capitol steps. Let's take a photo op. So we got everybody out there. They're standing there, and all of a sudden, Senator Markey walks up. So we did get a photo op with him, and he ended up staying for about half an hour or a little more, talking about E-rate. I mean, that's his legacy, the history. So that was a really awesome interaction.
And the story that he gave, which is really informative to all, or insightful, was that it was through bipartisan support that he actually got this passed. And because sometimes we think it's just someone leading the way, it was actually finding people to link arms around the idea that got this moving. And in that moment, I wouldn't have thought with who he connected to own this idea on the Republican side that that would have been the case. But that's so often the story, is just trying to figure out how do we help people recognize that this is a shared interest.
Republican from Maine, was the Republican member. Did you have one more question?
I just wanted to follow up. That's a really great photo. I've got one with my group in the same spot. But for other folks in the crowd who don't lobby, I don't want to diminish the importance of meeting with the members as well as with their staffers, because it's the staffers who actually make the recommendations. And it's the member who signs the thing in the end. So great work.
All right. Other questions? Here we
go. Great panel. I just actually, question. How can people stay on top of all these changes, especially since these things don't make the news? And like when you were talking about, screen time makes the news, right? But I didn't really see anything on the national news about the Wi-Fi and funding on the school buses and for, the hotspots and stuff like that. So how do people become informed on that? And how do, because there's a lot of information.
Sure.
Keep up on. So how do we become informed, and how do we just as parents, as constituents, as residents in our community, communicate that to our school boards, our elected, etc. Thank you.
And that was Donna Orr. Thank you, Donna. Question? Okay, answer.
Shelby has 320 member organizations, and they've got regular calls around the different interest areas.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to stay connected to what's happening, and then to carry that message to your different connection points, school boards or others.
Yeah. I was going to say, yes, so you could become a Shelby member if you would like. So yeah, you can actually, if you become a member, you can be part of these discussions that we have every month. We have policy groups around E-rate, the different programs, everything you heard today. This was everything we talk about every month. So you can become members, as Phil said. You can take that back, yourself, to your community, to your constituents, et cetera. And then also at Shelby, we offer, other services as well, free services. So we try to do public webinars. Those are open. We do newsletters, right? You can sign up for that. You don't have to be a Shelby member. So there are different ways in which we are trying to sort of keep the public informed. And then also events, right? So we do our fly-in, but then we also do an annual conference. So every year in October, we put on a conference. And again, just like with this panel and all of these different topics, we create panels that talk about all of these issues, but we dig deeper, of course. So you've got experts coming in who are talking about AI, for example. We had a whole workshop last year on AI. We talked about digital opportunity, USF litigation, everything you heard and more. So, the conference is a really good way if you want just sort of this kind of injection of all of these different topics and, to kind of learn. And you're in DC, and we also try to get, policymakers there. So we, invite USAC to come to, talk about administration and, changes and things like that. But we get members of the FCC, if possible, to either sit in and listen themselves or, be on panels.
Thank you. We have one more question from Nathan.
Hey, Nathan Vosberg from the Kalinga area, and I just wanted to first thank you all for all the work that you're doing, and then second all, the conversations around the Universal Service Fund, changing that, because most of us have a cell phone bill and most of us see that charge on there. Are we really talking about just increasing the charges on ourselves and having all of those providers agree to do that? Because I think that's where it happened last time when they decided they weren't going to take hits on their own profits. They were just going to pass that on to us. That's where you got that kind of bipartisan support. But is that kind of what we're talking about? Is everyone's going to be paying more?
Do you want me to take this?
You can start, but I'll finish.
Does somebody
of
else want
course.
to take
well,
this?
you want.
You have two deep experts right here.
So kind of, yes. So we're talking about contributions. So you are correct in that the providers are able to pass down those charges to consumers, if they want. But really here we're talking about the types of services. So right now it's on your telephone bill, but a lot of providers are, telephone services are diminishing, right? And so broadband services are expanding. So there's questions. Should we add broadband services into the mix? Should we add edge providers, right? Data,
Define edge
those
providers.
sort of services, to the mix. So essentially the conversation is if we broaden the base of the type of services that, contribute into the fund, essentially the bills should go down for each person because more people would then be paying into the fund. But the question is, what services do we add?
Which is
So
not a good-
traditionally-
and I think
Go ahead, Luis.
the conversation is the good conversation because we don't want the E-rate program or universal service to be subject to appropriations, right? And so there is a consensus at Washington. That's the good news of when we came back is that there's a general consensus that this should not be part of appropriations. But conversely, then we need to figure out the contribution factor because we need that sustainability and predictability in the fund.
So there's two working groups. One is looking at contribution reform, and the other is looking at the other side of the distribution.
So the old way it used to work is just wireline telephone paid in. That's the old-fashioned way. But then wireless started paying in, but only, they provide both data connection and also voice. So then they claimed most of it was data and very little was voice. And so therefore they only paid a little bit into the fund. And now the question is, do we bring in, VoIP providers? Do we even go bigger than that and bring in what we call edge providers, which are like eBay and Amazon and, Microsoft, those guys. And then, of course, that group, the edge providers go, you're taxing the internet. No. So that's a problem. So it's a big deal. But right now it is all funded through this little surcharge on the phone bills. And but most of the money, a lot of it is going towards broadband infrastructure programs. And so they're benefiting from that, but they're not paying in per se. So that's the big issue, and it's a huge issue. There is this new group that is starting up on the Hill to talk about it yet again. It's a 25-year problem, I would say, that has never been resolved. Okay, we're down to 0. We did it, panel.
Wow.
Thank you so much for having us.